Welcome, everyone. I'm going to get started on time to respect your time. Thank you for joining the Oral History Archives at Columbia for our How We Listen session with Nicole Wong and the Mahjong Project. I have heard many different pronunciations of Mahjong, so I'm going to try to stick with one and not be scattered about it. Um, First, just to tell you a little bit about how we listen. Um, the idea behind this series is that we have oral history interviews, audio, and transcripts in the archives, but oftentimes people don't know how to approach them. Should they listen to the oral history first? Or should they read the transcript along with the oral history? And so I like to have a look around for people who are using oral histories in really sort of compelling ways. And I had been invited to a weekly Mahjong game on the Upper West Side of New York and was looking around for instructions and came across the Mahjong project and thought, this is perfect in so many ways in terms of like learning the game and also having stories that go along with how people use the game in their lives to bond with one another. And so I'm really honored that Nicole agreed to do this session with us. So I wanted to first welcome Nicole. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that. I didn't know that was the introduction. So that's cool. So cool to know that that's how you found me.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it was like maybe right before the book was published. So it felt very much like excellent timing. So
Mhm.
and just to do a brief introduction of Nicole, Nicole is the author of Mahjong House Rules from Across the Asian Diaspora. And she started the Mahjong Project in 2019. And if you have a look at the website, which is themahjongproject.com, right?
Mhm.
It's part instructional guide, part oral history project. And I think what's really unique about it is that she used this as a method to document her family's house rules and to put them in like a broader historical context. And so, if you've not seen the book or had an opportunity to get it, you can get it at your independent bookseller. And I was telling Nicole that in preparation for this, I first read it front to back, and then I read it back to front for some reason because it just added a different kind of context. And so I hope we'll get into that as we discuss the origins of the project and also how it came to be. So, my first question, Nicole, is about the spark for the project. So, you mentioned coming to family games and taking notes. So I'm curious, like, what made you start taking notes about the game?
Yeah. Yeah. And the idea and the spark for the Mahjong project came before I started taking notes. So I guess
Okay.
in my career and in my, I guess ever since high school and college, I wrote for the school newspaper. I always liked writing. I liked stories, but I never thought of myself really as a writer, honestly. I um, was really interested in and curious about other people's stories. And so I think that's why it lended towards journal or kind of leaned towards journalism that felt more kind of serious. And I worked for an ad agency. So a lot of that work was doing like telling stories and doing profiles of people and businesses. And so I had a lot of experience interviewing other people, writing about other people. And I think that was definitely lay some of the groundwork of this Mahjong project because in 2018, a couple different things happened. One was honestly the movie Crazy Rich Asians, like that. That was a moment where I saw Mahjong being played in this big mainstream Hollywood movie, and I think for many people, it just got people thinking about Mahjong again. I had learned how to play the game from my grandparents, at least 10 or so years before that, right out of college. But I think it was a little spark where I decided to play with some friends. And so another thing that happened is that when I played Mahjong with some friends, we disagreed about what the rules were. Like we couldn't even decide what the scoring was or exactly how to do it. And so all of a sudden I had that feeling that this thing that I associated very closely with my grandparents and my family, I felt very far away from being able to actually know how to do that. And so that was definitely the spark in terms of the Mahjong project as a creative effort or a writing project, that it really did kind of spark a spark or light a fire that I really did want to know better how my family plays Mahjong, what the rules are, and kind of just becoming more aware that if I didn't do it, like, I don't know, like maybe I'll just never
Um,
know how to do it. So it was
yeah.
enough of an inspiration to kind of just keep plugging away at it. And then that's when I started to pull out a notebook when my family played Mahjong and say, I know actually, like, Dad, can you slow down and explain
Mhm.
how that scoring works? Or why is that worth 2 points? Or why is that worth, so and so? What was that thing you just said? So just taking a little bit more time to have him really explain it to me so that I wasn't just letting it wash over and instead trying to capture that. And that I think is just how my brain works, where that it made it really helped sink in once I was treating it like a assignment or project to learn it that way.
Did it help your game? Like, did it help your playing?
At first, probably not, because I was just trying to write things down and
Yeah.
probably was distracting from the actual gameplay. But I'd say over time now, yes, when I most recently played with my parents, I think they did kind of remark that, they could tell that I knew a little bit more what was going on, which I would hope is true after all of this time spent thinking about the game and playing
Yeah.
and
And
keeping
in
it fun.
the right, because you, in addition to like having the website and the book, you like do events where people play, right?
Mhm. And that was happening concurrently. For a while, I was just working on the website, which was kind of the directions of how to play Chinese style mahjong in a very straightforward, accessible way. I recognized that I wanted some visuals to accompany the written word because it is a game that's just so much I mean, it's easier to learn in person from a human being who can respond to your very specific questions
Mhm.
rather than a guidebook start to finish. And so I think that has tripped people up over time in trying to write it down. And so I was really aware of that problem of how to make something feel accessible. Like, not everybody has a person that can explain it to them in person. So how do you
Mhm.
split the difference of creating something that is helpful while also being open enough for people to read on their own time or have it supplement what
Yeah.
other information is coming to them as well.
Yeah. I did have it near me when I was playing a few times, and people were like, you're slowing down the game. But I wanted to understand, and it's very clear in that way with the pictures. So I want to go back to something you said. You mentioned just now, and also in the book, that the reaction of your family to you taking notes and wanting to know more, which I think is a reaction people often get when they start to do oral histories with their loved ones, which is like, why do you want to know this? And like, this is
Mhm.
no big deal. So, how did you, I guess, come to how did you manage to convince them that this was
Mhm.
like worthwhile to write down?
Yeah, I think it took a while, to be honest. I think for a while they didn't really, I think they knew that I was doing this, but I don't think they knew that it would actually amount to a website or amount to something, visual. And so I think I really focused it at first on the actual gameplay because that is easier, to kind of talk about and really nail down. And then I think as we all got more comfortable, the stories followed suit a little bit more. Like, I think even when I had the website launched, I was still refining it. I was still asking questions like, is this right? And then I would use, because of my experience in features writing and journalism and what have you, I kind of knew the opportunities to ask. And so when I'd say, oh, why was it this way? Oh, tell me about that. Like, when did you used to play when you were younger? Or who did you play with? Or just kind of finding those moments to get my family members to set the scene a little bit more. And so they kind of came in thinking that they were maybe going to talk about scoring, but then maybe surprising them with a question or two about that time. And so I think it wasn't, I think maybe they still had a little bit of the, oh, who cares? Why do you want to know this? But since we were already talking within the framework of, I'm trying to learn how to play Mahjong better, it I don't say tricked, but it kind of was a good way in to do that.
was there a person who was a good way into it? Because we often in oral history think about different communities, and if we're outside of those communities, there might be somebody who's like a gatekeeper, or I call them like the magic lever, that if you get that person to agree or to participate, other people feel like it's okay to participate. So
Mhm.
was there anybody in your family like that?
Well, so the style of mahjong that I write about is kind of from my dad's side of the family. So kind of I focus more on my dad and his siblings. His parents have passed away, so a lot of the question I was also asking was memories of them, of my grandparents. And so I mean, I do probably think that my parents were the first stop, and so I kind of spent time with them talking about them more before I kind of worked up the courage to talk to my dad's sisters, for example. And so I felt like I needed to have a little bit more knowledge and be able to talk the talk a little bit more. And so I'd say it maybe wasn't an exact lover, but I did feel like I had the comfort and safety, maybe security blanket of being able to just ask my parents a lot of, dumb questions, quote, about
Mm.
Mahjong before I could kind of broaden the search a little bit more to my most knowledgeable cousin and my aunts and uncles, and kind of show them when I came to them that I had done a little homework already and that I had a little built-in knowledge that this was a serious thing that I was doing. Even my aunt, I don't know, maybe this is a good segue into the clip,
Mhm.
that I had actually launched the whole website before I even talked to one of my aunts about it. And so she could really see a lot of the work that I had done already. And then that kind of helped open it up as well for the eventual book project. Like she knew that I had been working on this.
So you did your research, you did your homework, and then you had proof of concept
Good
before you
timing.
approached the auntie.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that funny? Just saying that out loud, how much I had to kind of work up to it. Because I do think there is a little bit of that fear of even within your family that you're like, why am I the one who's writing it down when there are other people who are
Oh,
so much more knowledgeable or like so
huh.
much better at this thing? And so I think where I landed was like, well, they aren't writing it down. So like I'm the one who's taking it upon myself to do, the legwork and wanting to actually come up with this product of a written document or eventual book or what have you. And so this is kind of how I feel generally, where there's many people who are much better at playing Mahjong than me, have spent many more hours playing. But I guess the advantage I have is also like hopefully being able to explain it in a accessible way, in a inviting way, in a way that people want to engage with. A lot of
Mhm.
people I've talked to, not, just broadly in the world through my events, do have a lot of memories of Mahjong being kind of an experience where they felt not invited up to the table by their aunties or uncles or, their elders.
Huh.
And so for some people, it's also kind of nice for them to feel like invited to kind of come into it and being able to access it that way as well.
Right. Cool. I think you're right. This is a good spot for the audio. So I'm gonna play that. And then
Yeah,
do
I
you
can
want to
set it up
set up
a
the
little bit.
clip or yeah?
Sure, yeah. So something that was really exciting, when I was invited to do this talk, given that it's the oral history archive, I throughout the process I did record some of my conversations and interviews with family members at first, and then now sometimes community members, people I meet, people in Oakland, Chinatown, where I live. I mean, I live in Oakland, but in Chinatown nearby. And so I went back and found this piece of audio that was from June or July 2023. So, 2.5 years ago. And this is when my friend and I were actually in Dunedin, New Zealand. And so we were sitting down to play Mahjong with my aunt and uncle. There's actually six voices in this clip. So my aunt and uncle, who have Kiwi accents, my parents, who also have Kiwi accents. So you'll hear kind of two male voices talking back and forth, and then two female voices talking a little bit back and forth as well. You can see, I mean, I guess we can kind of go into it a little bit afterwards, but basically we have played one hand and now we are shuffling again to play a second hand, and just showing how conversation kind of comes up dynamically as you're starting to play the game itself as well. And then me also trying to get in there with questions.
Which I like when the first hand. Yeah, it's old. No, I didn't mind.
Yeah.
I don't mind, but some people don't like when.
Really?
Yeah. Won't eat too much at tea
Superstitions.
time.
Yeah.
If you're losing, go and have a cold shower.
If you lose a big hand?
No, if you're losing that night.
And you have a break in the game.
You want to have a break and go and have a shower.
Or walk around your chair
yeah,
three
walk around
times.
the chair. Yeah, all the funny things like that.
What was the other one you just said about
Go and wash your hands, have a shower.
oh, wash your hands after
Walk around the table.
What you're trying to do is get rid of your bad luck.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
To get to rid your bad luck, you go have a shower.
Their time.
So Zach, also because you were playing all night, so there's time to take a shower?
Well,
no,
your luck's
you-
not there, right?
Sometimes you
do
Sometimes you
those
stop
things.
for coffee or
Please the bank.
In the old days, if Glenys wasn't playing, I'm losing, I let Glenys play and she always wins it back. Her luck was quite good.
Change
So
it
this is still an east
Yeah.
round, but the
Yeah.
wind has moved from.
And it's
right
goes
now.
around.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the round is east, and the person who's the bank is always the east.
Right.
And so the winds move accordingly, and it's counter compass.
Yes, which is what's
Yeah,
part
which
of
is
the thing
kind
that
of weird,
confuses
right?
me.
Yeah.
So there would be a lot of, superstitions.
Oops.
Oh, yeah.
And all different ways of doing it.
Who came up with the superstitions?
I don't know.
no.
I think
So
Glenys
just
is
Come
right.
up with it.
Yeah.
What? Oh, sorry.
She's just,
What?
Mr.
just
Mahjong.
threw you out already.
It has logic to it.
Already played?
That's mine. Yeah.
No, that's yours. Do you want
Yeah.
it?
No, I can't.
No, you
What
just
it-
pick it.
So
You
pick
see
one
who
up.
came up with the superstition?
Oh, uh-huh.
It comes with logic, and I'll explain the logic to you later.
Oh, okay. Why not now?
Well, because we're
Just
playing
throw this one
Mahjong.
aside.
Okay. So I can translate that in case attuned to the Kiwi accents are difficult. I was realizing that as I was listening. But why I chose that clip really is because there are multiple things happening at once in that conversation. And so what I should have said before is that this idea of superstitions of like what are some superstitions around playing the game, and so things that my uncle mentioned like taking a shower if you're losing a lot to try to change your luck. He'd said like, oh, he would let his wife sub in to like play a few hands that would try to change his luck. My dad there at the end was the one saying that there's like logic to it, actually, like that they make sense. And then meanwhile, my mom talking to my friend, explaining some of that gameplay aspects, which is another part of Mahjong, of just knowing which direction you're playing in and what wind seat you are affiliated with. So kind of some of this teaching aspect as well coming into play. And then meanwhile, I'm kind of peppering with questions. And so I just really love it because it really shows, we are all sitting together, we're all playing. That's the other thing. We're all playing as we are talking. Multiple conversations happening, and then meanwhile it is like this opportunity to kind of get a little deeper into conversation. And you're showing some of these clips. That is my aunt there who was talking and kind of laughing along. And so that's a little snippet of what it was like to play at their house.
There's so much going on already with the game, and that you're also like taking notes and learning at the same time was really like remarkable to me. 'Cause you mentioned here in this Instagram post, and I heard it in a different clip, like they play Chinese old style rules. And also at the top, you mentioned playing with friends who had different rules. So, like, what is it about, like, what's the connective tissue between like the stories and like a particular old style?
Yeah. So I think also in the context of this conversation being oral history, I think that because the game is often taught through oral history, through like oral practice.
Morality, yeah.
Yeah, orality. Yeah. Thank you. And so because of that, I think it just has kind of evolved in these certain ways. And because it is and so people can kind of adapt it and it evolve to the environment, let's say. So my family, as you see in this picture, we play with poker chips to exchange after every hand. And that is like a big part of it, of how many points you're worth, and you're squaring up after every hand. And then you sit for like a minimum of 16 hands for one full game. Something like that is a little bit
Wow.
impractical for events that I run, in Oakland, where it's like maybe more people than there are seats, and so there's more of a rotation, and so the rules kind of
Mm.
just get a little bit adapted. You're still playing the same game, but just like the specifics around it can kind of look different depending on the time you have or the people who are playing, the setting that you're in. And so that old style, actually, in my research for the book, I realized that because my great grandparents had moved from China, from southern China to New Zealand in the late 1800s, what
Mhm.
actually had happened is that that was how they were playing Mahjong in China then in the late 1800s. And because there was a smaller Chinese population in New Zealand relative to China, of course, they just kept playing Mahjong that way. And it didn't evolve because they are saying, oh, this is how you do it. This is how you play it. And so as it got passed down through the generations, like they didn't know that actually the game was evolving and the game was kind of changing, and it was kind of, different variations were coming about. And
Right.
so people that I've met, the only other people that I have met, maybe not only, but the first people that I met that were not like New Zealand Kiwi, Chinese Kiwis that played in this similar way were actually fourth generation San Francisco Bay Area Chinese Americans, right? But that's because
Okay.
my theory is that their families left China around the same time, maybe from the same area. And so this idea that Mahjong actually was almost a relic of our kind of traditions and things that we did, kind of, yeah, similar to food culture. I think that's like a much more commonly understood idea, that you have these old family recipes that kind of don't change. But meanwhile, in other places, they've kind of adapted to the place or geography.
Wow. I never really thought about how the geography plays a role because I think about, the games as play and they're also social, but they take place in specific settings
Mhm.
and in specific geographic settings. Because I was trying to imagine, like, I was like thinking about like card games specific to Michigan, where I grew up. And like you mentioned euchre. So euchre was one of those games.
Yes,
But
I've
then
heard.
also Uno is another
Mhm.
game where, I know people who, and spades, and people come up with all kinds of different rules. And there's kind of negotiation about whose rules you're going to follow.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and I knew that when I was thinking more and writing more about Mahjong, that I was thinking about other games as well, because that was also some of my motivation, where I was like, this is for me about Mahjong, but my family is also a game family. We like playing card games. I like playing board games with my friends. And so that idea that there are the rules for the game, but then there's also like the culture around it, or like the little
yeah.
universe of um, nicknames or house rules or like funny etiquettes or quirks can also kind of get wrapped up in that, and it can kind
Mhm.
of yeah, just help build that community around, yeah, what you're doing. And it does create this nice sense of community.
Yeah. And I really appreciated in the preface of the book that you're so kind and encouraging for people who might want to gather stories, because you confess to some insecurity about, like you said, like, am I the person to be doing this? And so I was wondering if you could talk about some of the advice that you offer to people in exploring these stories. And I'm going to drop into the chat a PDF for the book. Specifically, there's a page that you share. I want to make sure I'm getting the right one.
Yeah, that one. Sure, yeah. And I think a lot of that
Yeah.
kind of mindset and eventual how I got over it was really also connected to my a past job in which I worked in podcasting, actually.
Okay.
And so this idea that yeah, for me, like, am I the one to tell this? I think this realization that, like, why can't I? Like, just kind of giving myself permission to do
Mhm.
that in the same way, there's like so many podcasts. There's like so many podcasts about every topic. And so when I
Yeah.
was working in that world, just realizing, oh, like there's so many people just talking about a thing they like. And there are people who gravitate towards that, right? So it's almost you don't know who is also interested in that thing until you are the one who starts talking about it. And it's like easier to find those people if you actually initiate that, you know? So that was really encouraging to do. And again, what I was saying, how I was used to writing about other people, but I think just having a little bit more vulnerability to say, oh, actually, this is the thing about my life that I want to spend some time doing. And I think because it was on the internet, it's just like, this is just my little corner of the internet. I'm not, no, nobody has to be here. Like if people are interested, they will come and find it. And if not, that's fine. So, versus trying to, have someone say like, oh, this is a thing that I should, taking up that space that might be, I don't know, allotted elsewhere. So yeah, and I think also just
Uh,
because I am not an expert, right? I'm not I did not go to grad school for oral history, or I did not have, any sort of like formal training. And so I think also I came to it with that where, yes, I've had specific career experiences that have helped me kind of bring it all together, but just this idea that a lot of it is just doing it. It's just like taking the time and having the motivation to actually, call up that person and get the story that that they have or whatever.
right.
So I
Right.
did feel like that was I wanted to encourage that. In terms of the tips that I share, also
Mhm.
influenced by some of the work I'd done in podcasting, where a lot of it is just being a really careful listener and just
Yeah.
giving people time to answer and space. I did take an oral history workshop from a woman named Shanna Farrell at UC Berkeley, and I do remember a lot of what she said that was kind of different between journalism and oral history. With oral history, just you're giving
Yeah.
people
Talk about that.
yeah, I mean, my takeaway from it is that, in a written piece, you're perhaps like trying to get someone like a quote to kind of build an argument or like a thing that you're already writing about. Like you're telling a story. You're maybe talking to someone because you want their opinion or perspective on a specific preset thing you're doing. Whereas with oral history, it really is much more open. And you tell me if this is right. Much more openness where the idea, the act is just to be a witness to what the story is. And so maybe not needing to feel as directive as to what am I doing with this? It's more just the act of collecting it, um, and then figuring out, I guess, later what you do
Yeah.
with it.
Figuring out like what is this? And the
Uh-huh.
act of also like how people tell the stories, which is also
Mm.
like really I love that in your advice, one of your suggestions was ask questions that help set the scene. What was
Mhm.
it like when? What do you remember from? And use the senses. What did it look like? What did it sound like? Because I think you're spot on in those differences between like maybe journalism or a social science interview where people are like super goal oriented and they kind of already know
Mhm.
what they want to get
Mhm.
versus like oral history, like letting the story unfold, which I think is like also what I heard in some of the other recordings that you shared.
Mhm.
Um, so I was wondering if there were, and I'm always up for critiquing oral history method, don't get me wrong. So, like, were there things that you maybe learned about oral history or heard in the workshops that you tried and they didn't work, or that you just heard about them and you thought, well, that wouldn't work for this project?
I think, I mean, I remember one thing was the takeaway was like the setting, like how are you going to kind of like warm up the person to know where like which era of memories you want kind of like and that I think I tried it different ways before before I got there. So similar thing, I think maybe I'd reached out to a couple family members just being like, hi, I want to interview you about your memories of Mahjong. When can we talk? And then I don't think it came together. Like I think that's like an easy thing to ignore or say, push off. And so
Mhm.
really like it took in like the recording that we just played, like it took kind of sitting down, playing, finding that like time in which people are ready to access those memories, I guess, and being open to that. you can't really force it on people to share, to get into that deeper contemplative mindset. And so, yeah, that was definitely a learning that I couldn't just say like, okay, like I need to do this. Can we
Yeah.
talk? And so having, something like Mahjong was obviously such a great way to open that up because, you're literally tempting them to play a game with you and then asking them while you're playing. But yeah, I do think that they can take different forms.
Mhm.
And yeah, maybe that's also in some ways kind of like a trust building thing, that they are, yeah, like have a better sense of what you're doing as well.
Yeah.
I think it's really different too when you're doing perhaps oral history project on your own family with people versus like a different community that you're kind of coming into. Yeah, so that can look really different too as well, I bet.
Yeah. And I think what some people find when they're trying to interview family is like the person doing the interviewing thinks they know specific stories and they want to get specific stories, but maybe your person you're interviewing doesn't want to tell those stories, or they tell it differently, or they want to tell a different story. So there was just something I think about also the sound of the tiles, and there's like a food connection, and I think there's all kinds of senses that you're able to sort of capture in the audio and also in the book and in the stories that you surfaced. So well
Yeah,
done.
and thank you. No, that's so nice to hear. I think people really, when they sit down to play Mahjong, it really, because of that sensory experience, it honestly does sometimes transport people to younger versions of themselves, or it transports them to playing with other people who might not be around anymore or old
Mm,
friends. And so it really does, I think it does something in that, right? So because of the physical aspect, people can almost like really like actually access those like memories better than if they were just asked on the street about it.
yeah, or if they're
So.
just like sitting in a room without the game in front of them or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've experienced that too. Like when you're playing a certain scenario will come up, like I don't know, a certain tile will be discarded and it's certain scenario, and it can remind you of a specific time where that happened, when you were playing
Right.
another person. Again, I mean that happens with games, but I think that also kind of brings that up for people, which makes
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
Mhm.
I want to invite people to ask questions. And if you want to look at the website and ask Nicole questions about that, I'll drop the link for the site into the chat. And feel free to raise hand or put questions in the chat. So I want to get a bit into the site and the book, if we can like shift there for a bit. Um, One of your questions about the game was that you have in the book is like, why has it retained a sense of foreignness? And I'm wondering if you found an answer to that question in hosting the games. And then there might be a follow up question.
Sure. Yeah, I think that when I first started thinking more deeply about Mahjong, I was also playing board games a lot. I like learning a board game on a weekend was not so unusual with friends. And I think that's kind of where that idea came up, where I was thinking, oh, I'm willing to open up a new board game and read a manual about, trading sheep in the countryside or what have you, like some of these other different scenarios. And why hasn't that same lens been applied to Mahjong? And so I don't know, like I was thinking about that, this like idea of unknowability around it. And I think there's many reasons, just because it is a complicated game, because it has mostly been taught through orality, sort of now will use. And I think because um, in the US, I think just this idea of like uh, the cultural traditions from Asian culture, just has a history of feeling perpetually foreign. That is like that is just like part of the history of the Asian diaspora here in the US and the Asian American experience. And so I think there was just that question up there of like, why does this game feel different? Like, why can't I go to a board game store and find a Mahjong set? And I think that is actually changing right now because there is so much popularity in the game, and it's cool. Like I'm excited about that this presence of it can feel more everyday and regular, that it's just a game that people play. And yeah, I think it did take a little bit of that. I also think about in recent months, just thinking more about how I guess learning more about the elder gen. So my parents moved from New Zealand to the US in the 1980s, but there is a long tradition of Asian Americans, Chinese Americans in the US, and the conditions in which Chinese Americans immigrated to, or Chinese people moved to the US was often under I don't know, there was this sense of the older generations not always wanting to share so much, both because of their own status in the US or just because of a culture of just like not talking about, their own stories. And so I do think there's something now that is a little bit different where it's like, oh no, it's okay. It's okay to talk about, some of these stories of your life or your childhood. It's not like your life began when you moved to the US. Like what else was happening? And so again, Mahjong is just one little piece of it. It's just like it's just a game, and but it can give people permission to maybe feel more okay in asking about some of that history and memories and stuff that might be painful for people as well.
That's what I was wondering, and you're speaking to it because I was thinking, like, was there a kind of either exclusiveness, or was it more about sort of protection? So, like protecting one's heritage and one's stories from a culture that might have been hostile to it. But as you're noting, I think maybe we could talk about like why there's more of an interest and maybe a market for mahjong.
Yeah, I mean I feel like within it, and sometimes I'm like I have no idea, and sometimes like I have theory. Yeah, but I mean I think right now it is the Lunar New Year, Chinese New Year season, and at least for me anecdotally, like it's much more I just feel like there's much more broad awareness of that than there was when I was a kid. When I was a kid, it was something that I knew I knew it was Chinese New Year. We would have dinner, but it wasn't like a big kind of like commercial holiday. There wasn't big companies like talking about it. And so I just think there's like a
Mhm.
broader awareness of broadly like more diverse cultures and traditions celebrated in the United States. And
Right.
so I think that's there. I think that the game it does have kind of like a viral quality to it in that if you play
Mhm.
it, people learn how to play it and then they want to naturally play again, and then now you have to recruit more people to like learn how to play it. There is just like something about it that I think invites more people to want to learn and come into it. And I think just like many things have aligned right now to just make it very popular. There's also, businesses out there that are selling lots of sets, and, I am trying to sell my book, and, like there's lots of sure, there's like people who like want, who are excited about the popularity of it. But I think it also just speaks to the moment right now that we're in where people are very online, people are very on screens. And so playing a game like this that is very tactile, in which you are sitting around a table, talking to people, that feels very good. Having a
Mhm.
reason to go over to someone's house but also have an activity with a little bit of structure in which you don't have to just be drinking or openly chatting, like having an activity, I think people are liking.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I think it's just meeting a lot of like things right now for people.
Yeah.
Uh,
Um, this might be more of a statement than a question, but because as I was doing research and thinking about this, I was noticing the Americanization of the game,
mhm.
and I'm wondering, and I mean that in terms of like people are creating tile sets that have, I think, is the Joker, I think, an American
Mhm.
character or like
It's like a
addition
new
to the
tile that was
game.
created.
Yeah, and so, and there's a history of like a kind of mahjong. I forgot what it's called, like the society that formed in the 1930s, maybe to
Yeah.
popularize the game. So like I said, I don't know if that's more of a question. I haven't formed a question.
Yeah, I
It's
could, yeah,
something
and
about the
I would,
Americanization kind of irritates me.
sure. And I would welcome conversation and questions and thoughts about this from the group here. And
Yeah.
we're not a huge group, so I would be curious to know kind of
Mm.
like how are people coming into this conversation. But yeah, American Mahjong was an offshoot of Chinese Mahjong that was invented or in the 1930s. And Mahjong did have this big moment in the 1920s when it was just very popular. It's hard to know how it compares to right now, right? Because it's just so different. But it was
Yeah.
very popular. Hollywood movie stars were photographed playing Mahjong. It was marketed in, all the big department stores on all the main strips in New York and LA. And, so it was popularized certainly as a recreation. I think that at the time, it was also this idea that China and Asia was in the public imagination as being something
Mm.
exotic, interesting, and perhaps a sign of, this like global perspective. So I think that was kind of interesting to read about in the research. And also kind of what I alluded
Mm.
to at the time that during this time when it was so popular was actually concurrent with when Chinese immigration was actually prohibited. There was a race-based exclusion act of Chinese people into the United States, and so
Huh.
that kind of just disjointedness is just really interesting to think about. This
Yeah.
aspect of things that are or like games and activities that are culturally Chinese, but like actually like people being treated really differently. And so, whether that relates to the current moment, it's kind of think we're so in it that it's hard to know, but that I just found really fascinating. And so because after this big mainstream moment of Mahjong, it did kind of like take root in different places. And so of course continued to be played in Chinatowns across the US, and the American version was kind of evolved. It started more in New York and people playing Mahjong as a way to hold charities and fundraisers. That's also when it became more affiliated with women playing, and it was a reason for women to have an excuse to go to each other's houses and homes and visit, right? So it was more
Mm.
acceptable.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was really held up through those decades and continues to be quite popular. This American version, a
Mm.
lot, not so much outside of the U.S., but here is very popular.
So interesting. Um, there's a comment that some of our branch libraries in Queens, New York offer Mahjong Club, quite popular with our customers.
Hmm.
That's great to know.
Hmm.
And also, Francis
Yeah,
has a
libraries, I
question.
feel like for
Oh,
long, yeah,
yeah,
I
we
have
can pause there.
writing this book has brought me into closer contact with a lot of public libraries, and it just makes me so grateful to public libraries around the country and just like the important cultural work that you all do. So it is so cool to hear about Mahjong clubs. Yeah, just like, popping up or no, like having existed actually, not the ones that are new, right? That's where they've been. um,
Yeah. And also just reaffirming the like public libraries as one of our few remaining public spaces
mhm, mhm.
and accessible spaces. So to have a game that has all of these kind of social aspects is really,
Yeah.
like, I think,
Mhm.
critical. And then also, there's a question, which I think is a
Hmm.
great question.
Yeah,
Francis
really.
asked about any museums or libraries that have collected Mahjong sets or tiles.
When I was doing research for the book, the best or like the collection that I was able to actually talk to was at the Brooklyn Museum. Actually, they had
Oh,
some documents, like original documents from um some of like the earliest appearances of mahjong sets in the US. Like there was like a man who had written about I think he was like an ethnographer, and he had like written about the game of mahjong and a set that
um,
had been acquired into like the Brooklyn Museum collection back then. So that was really interesting to see, and some like really interesting similarities. In terms of the actual sets, I don't know, but I would say like probably under indexed in terms of like where those sets exist. I would be curious actually to know more. There's a lot of private collectors in the US who have very fascinating like vintage or antique sets. And so that would be so cool to see in the next decade or so, like some of those sets maybe start to become, viewable, through museums or libraries because they're really special items. And fascinating. Like although they were hand carved back in the day, a lot of them have a lot of different variation amongst the tiles. You can really see that. And then of course, over time, it became more industrialized. And so, yeah, I would love to actually do a little research on that. Like, is there a collection that has like the biggest or, most robust collection of sets? I would guess that maybe it's common for many museums and libraries to have a couple sets that are like included in their, Chinese antiques sets, but perhaps, I'm not aware of any particular collection, but that could definitely be the case. I'd love to know.
Yeah, Francis is giving us work because I'm interested. I'm interested in like the collecting and also the mapping. Because we at the Rare Book and Manuscript Library, we have like an extensive playing card set, for example. So
Interesting.
this might be an
Yeah, and
interesting
playing cards,
ancillary project.
that would be so interesting. Because the playing cards, I always often think about the two, because playing cards are more flimsy than Mahjong tiles as well. I mean, I guess they're
Mm,
smaller and more compact, but that is why I'd say a lot of Mahjong sets are in people's private collections, because they're just things
right.
that are often passed down to people because it feels like a shame to just like get rid of. Because you're like, so a lot of people that I've met who are my contemporaries have Mahjong sets but have never played because it was like their grandma's set, but they've kept it because it's a special
Yeah.
object, but haven't actually used it. So I don't know, that's interesting to think about as well. Yeah, and you definitely can find Mahjong sets at flea markets and other, aspect places where you'd find antiques. But yeah.
I got lost on I think eBay and Etsy looking
Mhm.
at different sets and also
Mhm.
wondering like where has this set like traveled? Where has it been? So
Yes, there's
um
lots of fun stories around that.
yeah. Again, we're open to questions or even your stories if you have like stories or reminiscences that you'd like to share. Um, while because we were talking about, I guess, nostalgia and holding on to the sets, I was really interested in some of the feelings that emerged when you were doing this research. And like, for example, in the book, I think it might have been uh, you mentioned like I think you called it Chinese American shame at needing
Mhm.
the sort of the Arabic numbers on the
Yes,
tiles.
yes.
And I'm wondering like what other like feelings emerged over the course of this project.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that same where we talked a little bit of it's not full imposter syndrome, but just that question of like, why me? Like, why am I the one doing this? I definitely felt that much more acutely in the aspects of like Chinese language when that came into play, because I do not speak Chinese. My family has my parents speak some Cantonese with their parents, right? So it's like very specific to like family
Mm,
taught like speech. I don't think my mom could go to Hong Kong and like get by, so I think it's like that was like a point of feeling a little bit unsure of how to go about it. And so, the result there was just like I talked to a lot of people. I got to learn new things about Chinese language, about I don't know, it was a really cool like, educational moment as well. But with Chinese Mahjong also, I think another part's confusing. That is confusing is because there are certain, even just like the names of the tiles, or like certain actions in the game that could be people know them by the Cantonese word for it or the Mandarin word for it or something else. So even just being able to map that, I do have like a little bit of a guide where I tried to map out like this thing is called this in Cantonese, but called this in Mandarin, but also called this in, just other places in the English language. And that was a fun challenge that I had to kind of like get around and figure out. But I felt like it was, definitely worthwhile to, it was really like important for me to make sure that, that was represented because a lot of my book too is for people who are just maybe coming back to the game. And so maybe they don't even know how to play, but they'll remember certain words, if that makes sense. Like there'll
yeah,
be
yeah.
triggers to get people back into it. And
Mhm.
so I wanted to have that openness with it of just being like, oh, maybe you heard it this, I like this, or maybe you heard it like this. So,
So it's much more inclusive than, yeah,
yeah, I
in ways
wanted
that
it
it
to
could have.
feel, yeah, like people could come to it not knowing what variation they learned and then be able to find more direction to that.
Um, in the book, you mentioned your son Oliver, and I was
Yes.
curious if Oliver was playing yet.
Well, he's only a year and a half, so
Okay.
not quite. He has often when I get the sets out, like if I'm going to an event, he'll crawl over and just like want to interact with them because they are so visually
Yeah.
appealing. So he's definitely tried to like eat one, which I've had to be careful
No.
of.
Yeah.
But yeah, he will learn. There's many photos that I have of different nieces and nephews just being sat in the high chair next to the table. And I recently played with a 4-year-old who knew how to play, just like could just
What?
buy. And that's like the goal where I was like, wow, by 4 years old, this kid could be playing. So yeah, I have a couple years, but yeah, he'll learn and yeah, my nieces and nephews who are like between 6 and 8 can now play with my parents as well. So it's very cute.
That's very sweet. Well, are there any closing thoughts that you have or anything we didn't cover that you'd want to share with us?
No, I mean, I'd love to put it out there if anybody else wants to even just like say hello or introduce themselves or anything like that.
Screen sharing.
Can I say hello from Ireland?
Oh, yes.
Nicole, thank you so much for your book. We now have a group of 4. We're learning to play. We're finding out gradually how to play.
Yes, you emailed me, right, Glenda?
Yes,
Have we
yes,
exchanged
that's
emails?
right.
Yeah, I recognize your
Yeah.
name.
And we appreciated in particular your authoritative guidance about snacks, where to place them.
What snacks do you have when you play, Glenda?
Oh, well, we had, grapes and crackers and all sorts of things, but we were so busy trying to figure out how to play it. We didn't eat very much. But thank you very much, Nicole. It's a great book. I'm close to Belfast, and I think there are people playing, but I haven't been able to discover them yet. So we're starting a little movement here.
That's wonderful. That is so cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for saying hi.
Yeah, thank you for joining
Best
us.
of luck with your continued play.
Thank you.
Oh.
Hi, Nicole. This is Jim Ching. I'm Kimberly's colleague at Columbia.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Yeah. I learned how to play in China, and my wife and I brought a heavy set from China to US. So I used to, I'm still walking back and forth to the campus. I used to pass the Harlem. I always see the Morrison Park. There's a group of black ladies. They always play mahjong. I kind of want to join them. It was like
Cool.
amazing to see. All these black ladies. They are very well. They play very well. They really enjoy it. So to me, it's a mahjong becomes like a cross, racial groups in the U.S. Very interesting.
That's really cool.
That's a great sighting.
Yeah.
I'll have to go look for them.
The sets are heavy. They definitely take some lugging around. That's the other.
Well, thanks for joining us, Jim.
Another question for you is I used to hear, in the San Francisco, the area, there's some kind of underground mahjong gambling houses. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I personally can neither confirm nor deny that. I certainly have talked to people who are very entrenched with the Chinatown neighborhood that, yeah, would certainly say that, yes, that is, that happens, that has been happening. I'm thinking of this one guy in particular who's associated with the Chinese Historical Society in San Francisco. And yeah, I mean, I think the game has, it's interesting because the game for some people is very heavily associated with gambling. For some people, like it has been a gateway into, it's like problems in their life related to gambling and gambling addiction. And there certainly are places where people could play, but so again, for my research in my book, I was not, I did try to get into that world just because it was not my again, as a non-Chinese speaker, it's hard to hard to navigate the underground ways of Chinatown. But I do remember a friend or somebody I met at an event. He did mention that he was a San Francisco kid and was just like going around the city as a youth and remember like opening up the doors and just like seeing a lot of people playing Mahjong and kind of like a get out of here, mindset. So yeah, I mean, I think people gather and play in all sorts of ways. And yeah, there's actually a really interesting podcast that came out that I listened to that was about New York City in the 1980s, Chinatown. And it was actually, it was a true crime podcast. And so they were talking about how some of the ladies playing Mahjong in Chinatown in the 80s were kind of using it as a communication spot for some drug smuggling. So, there are things that have happened, but I wouldn't say it's like one or the other. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you.
There's a message from Cecilia in the chat. Thanks for such a great interview. I live in San Francisco and I love seeing the resurgence of Chinese, Hong Kong, Asian Mahjong being played in the Bay Area.
Thanks, Cecilia. Yeah, I hope to meet you at an event in the future. I host events in the Bay Area a couple, like 1 or 2 times a month or so. And I love to make them open to people who are new to the game, but also I always have tables out for people if they just want to sit and play and don't need any instruction. And I like to partner with Asian-owned businesses when possible or have them be in Chinatowns and bring people out, because it's a game that people will come out for. And so being thoughtful about where to have those events and what sorts of partners and, you can spotlight as well.